Hello, everybody. So, this is round 2 of debunking the bullshit that Brooks is sharing in his Discord server. I just want to say, first, that it's really sad and pathetic that I kind of have to resort to this, style of critique because Brooks is so much of a pussy that he will not address me publicly. And I think that that's just really pathetic. Like, you should show your face when you're saying these things. You should stop being a huge pussy, and I don't know, maybe stream this, maybe respond to this live, so that we can actually hear your pussy ass opinions live instead of hiding behind your Discord server. And I will address a couple of the things that they say about me regarding the Discord server and my banning later in this video. I would like to just preface though by saying they are lying about the fact that I got banned for transphobia. That's the reason why they don't show receipts. The real story is a lot funnier. I'll talk about it later in the video. But let's just go through these screen caps because again, these guys post a bunch of horse shit and miseducate their audience. So let's go through this. So this Voxy person starts out with, so I was recommended a post on YouTube from somebody who I have no interest talking about and think in general that the server does not want brought up.
Oh, jeez. Oh, my God.
But the first part started that it was highly unlikely that DG were talking about autism when talking about the schizophrenic subject, right? Now, when I say that it was highly unlikely that they were talking about autistic people, I don't mean that Anti-Oedipus can't be about autistic people. In fact, I think that the synthesis of radical autism and radical schizophrenic thought is really important. At the time, you had Félix-Guattari, who was the guy who hang out with schizos, and then you had Fernand Delaney, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, forgive me, who was working with autistic people. And at the time, because of, narrow views, especially I would argue on Guattari's side, Delaney knew that they were fighting alongside each other after reading Molecular Revolution, but he was pissed off that Guattari did not seem to conceive that these people were not just like their brains weren't working. It was like it was a choice to be mute and to live that way. And Delaney did not appreciate that Guattari didn't fully understand that, but Delaney understood that they were fighting the same battle, basically, and it would be great to watch a sort of revival of that dynamic, but I think that it is important to be historically honest about what Anti-Oedipus was about, right? It can be used for autism and radical autistic views. I'm not saying that it can't. It doesn't mean it can't be interpreted through an autistic lens. But we should not just say that they were treating autistic people when they were very clearly treating schizophrenics, and there's a shit ton of evidence to demonstrate this. It's just like Psychoanalysis and Transversality, the Labourd's official website. I mean, there's just everything that Uri put out. Does Brooks even know who Jean Uri is? Oh wait, I think he does. He does mention Uri later, but yeah, just to be clear, I am not saying that autism is not allowed to be analyzed through this, but considering that autistic people have already a tendency to dominate in neurodiverse spaces and basically push out schizophrenics almost systematically, and schizophrenics as a group really struggle to even have any, sort of political representation anywhere because, as Deleuze and Guattari really stress, everybody hates the schizo, and that still happens to this day. I mean, what do you think this is all about? So anyways, To be clear, I do believe that it is extremely unlikely that DG were specifically talking about autism in the Project for Capitalism and Schizophrenia, and this historical revisionism that autism and schizophrenia were interchangeable is just nonsense to... I don't understand also where this historical revisionism is coming from. It seems to be sourced from Brooks and his friend Roger, but, like... I just, yeah, I don't know where exactly it's coming from outside of that. So, anyways, let's continue. And thoughts unrelated to this person. What are their thoughts around that? Also, can I just say it's really funny that apparently I'm so evil in this Discord server that I am he who shall not be named? Like, come on, just call me Punished Felix, it's okay, honey. I'm not the devil. I was interested because the framing seems pretty different from what I've heard previously. Yeah, because you're probably listening to one person. I never have heard of this claim before outside of Brooks. Genuinely, I have no idea who has said this. So, this person says, I feel like it'd take a lot of evidence to say they weren't talking about autistic people, considering autism was under the schizophrenia umbrella when the book was written. That's not true. Actually, autism, as I keep saying in pretty much every post that I talk about this, refers to a symptom, right? So, like, give me 1 second. Alright, so for example, I opened up Anti-Oedipus because this is one of the quotes that they think is proving me wrong. Okay, so they say right here, there is no very great difference between false materialism and typical forms of idealism. The theory of schizophrenia is formulated in terms of three concepts that constitute its trinary schema: dissociation, autism, and space-time or being in the world, right? So in that particular sentence, it's very clear that Deleuze sees autism as a symptom, and what autism means as a symptom is it basically means you close yourself off from the outside world. It's kind of like you're autonomous in a way, but it's not quite the same as autonomous. It's like it's not voluntary. It's kind of like a withdrawal from, social interaction. And that's why autistic people, or what we would call autistic people today, is... and schizophrenics actually share this symptom, and they share it for a very different reason, but they both struggle with interacting with the outside world. And as we'll see through this, I think that Brooks demonstrates that he's never actually talked to a schizophrenic. And I know that Deleuze and Guattari say that, but that was tongue-in-cheek, bro. Felix talked to schizos, you didn't, and it's pretty obvious. So, let's go back to... Alright, so we got Raven here. They said, that, and Guattari mentioned several times, I believe the word was autonomisa. Correct me if I misspelled, which was mid-1970s, 80s French for autism. I have some really bad news for Raven. That's not the French word for autism. That's the French word for Marxist autonomist, right? If you guys knew anything about what Guattari was doing, you would know that Guattari was doing a lot of things in Italy in the 1970s, right? Especially with, basically he was trying to put Anti-Oedipus in motion, and the Italian autonomists kind of seemed like they were one of the first groups to, experiment with, and he was very heavily involved with these guys. He helped bail them out. And he even housed them when they were exiled out of Italy. We're talking figures like, Franco Bifo Berardi and, Tony Negri and those kind of guys, right? So, no, that's not autism. I'm so sorry, but that is not autism. I literally lost it for like 30 minutes when I saw this. I was like, no! Don't tell Bifo! Okay, so this person just says move the question somewhere else. Okay, so here's where, like, the meat of their criticism comes from. So first we have Roger Normandin, right? So this is who I'm referring to when I say Roger. I know my name's also technically Roger, but this is this guy, right? And he posts this article right here. So I actually found this article, and I will pull it up real quick. I think this is the same one. Okay. Yes. So this article, and I don't know what he's posting this article for, but this article, so the abstractor says, to highlight emerging evidence for clinical and biological links between autism, pervasive development disorder, and schizophrenia, with particular attention to childhood onset schizophrenia, right? And why? Why are you linking this? I mean, nobody's disputing whether or not autism or schizophrenia forms a larger complex, right? Like, actually, in my opinion, I think that autism, schizophrenia, migraines, and epilepsy form a neurological complex, among a couple other things, right? I think all of those things are actually related, but that doesn't mean that we can't differentiate between the four things. Like, obviously, we can tell the difference between schizophrenia and a migraine clinically, right? But that doesn't mean that they can't be related. And, childhood schizophrenia is already a pretty controversial diagnosis, in my opinion. I know maybe some people viewing this might disagree, but I'm personally pretty skeptical of it as a diagnosis. My understanding of schizophrenia, so for some context, right? I think that this is the Lacanian psychoanalytic general understanding of how schizophrenia works, but I could be wrong about this. I am not a very good Lacanian. That is like the big difference between me and Félix-Deux. I suck at Lacan. But the way I understand it is that autism is a sort of pre-ego forming condition, which is why it appears in childhood. So like it's a condition where it's not like an autistic child has no sense of consciousness or anything, but rather ego formation is kind of like about, understanding one's position in a larger social context. And autistics struggle with building that interface, that social interface, for one reason or another. And then schizophrenics, on the other hand, are people who have established that ego relation in some sense or another at one point in their lives, but it falls apart. Right, it basically, I think like a good way to think of it is the way I described my schizophrenic experience was, those old Pokemon games for the Game Boy, like Pokemon Red and Blue. So those games don't have error checking. So when a glitch happens, it just modifies the code, and what happens is that this can continue iteratively, and it keeps modifying the code itself. Through iterations until it's completely unstable and unusable, right? That's kind of what schizophrenia is like, right? So, this doesn't prove anything, and Roger doesn't explain what it's used for. He doesn't explain what this means. He just links this. He just says intro sets the content of this conceptualization at the time. No, this doesn't really talk about what the conceptualization at the time is, and it doesn't present any sort of... Hey there, everybody. Future Felix here. So I got a little confused by what Roger meant by the introduction, and so I re-reviewed the document, and the introduction is just talking about how autism and schizophrenia was not differentiated in the DSM, the DSM-2, which, again, is just irrelevant to anything related to Anti-Oedipus, because they weren't working with the DSM, they were working with Lacan, so, again, just irrelevant. Sorry about that confusion. Evidence that my claim that autism is a symptom, not a disorder in this time and place and period, yeah, so that's not right. Okay. Wow, thank you very much. There's another article I posted many times in here about the history of the conceptualization. It's always very tempting to review historically situated texts within our own current categories, but it gives them another meaning. But schizophrenia and autism shared definitions at the time, and it's quite tricky to read the text correctly, just as current definitions will be respecified, clarified in time. This is a really condescending, stupid opinion, because we already have texts, believe it or not, that talk about this structure. This is not something that is ambiguous, right? This is something that, you know, we can actually read for ourselves, right? So give me 1 second. I'm going to pull it up again. There's a book you can read. It's called Disalienation by Camille Robsus. This is a book I have been recommending for years because it's a great introduction to the topology of what these people were working with, right? This is a whole book. Look at this. That's just a glossary. Those are illustrations. Okay, so we've got Francois Tosquel, Saint Alban, and the invention of institutional psychotherapy, Frantz Fanon, the pathologies of freedom and the decolonization of institutional psychotherapy, Félix Guattari, Laborde, and the search for anti-Oedipal politics, Michel Foucault, psychiatry, anti-psychiatry, and power, epilogue, the hospital as a laboratory of political invention, right? This book is like 160 pages or something. It's not super long, and it will make very clear to you what the topology that these guys are hiding behind, like this. Oh, it was different back then. You can read about it. You can educate yourself. It's not like a big mystery that you get to hide behind. No, it's a real thing that you can do real research on. Like, look at this. There's a whole book you can read. Like, look at this. I don't think he's ever seen any of this shit. I don't think he's even knows that Francois Tosquel is the guy who came up with institutional psychotherapy. Like, look at all this that you're missing out on. Look at all this. This is what happens when you hide behind, like, fucking Redditor logic and don't realize what the real world is like. There's a whole world that these idiots are missing out on. So yeah, like, Roger, you can read about that history. You don't have to pretend that things were different and hide behind, like, articles that have nothing to do with anything. You can actually show people what any of this crap is about. Okay, so Voxy says, yeah, I see, yeah. If you can read French or translate the text, it gives them context around the board and alternative treatments, which gave way to some of the elements in AO. So what is this article? Alright, so this is that article, right? This is in French. I'm going to auto-translate it. So pro tip, I know some people in the audience are, like, allergic to AI. AI translation is not going to hurt you, okay? It's a helpful tool. Doesn't mean we're going to replace our good friend Taylor Adkins, but I don't want to call Taylor Adkins every single time I find a French article that is more complicated than, like, 3 words that I know in French. So, you know, let's use the auto-translate to kind of see what this is talking about. So, I'm not going to read this article, but it's basically about the history of Fernand Delaney. Right, so this actually goes into a lot of depth. It's a very interesting article. I still have to read the whole thing. Fernand Delaney is really hard to read about in English because he's just not talked about very much. You pretty much only hear about him when you're researching Guattari. He does have a book called The Arachnian, but it's extremely hard, and I've never really gotten through it. It's definitely one of those things I feel like you gotta be in the right mindset to really fully appreciate. But basically, like I said before, Delaney was this figure who was really focused on autistic children, unlike Guattari, who was focused on schizophrenic or emotionally disturbed adults, right? Guattari I think maybe he worked with kids a few times, but he was primarily working with adults. And then you had Fernand Delaney, who was primarily working with children. And what happened was, according to Intersecting Lives, Delaney showed up at Laborde in 1967 on a bus, basically, and said, "This is my project. I'm doing radical guerrilla warfare with these autistic children," basically. I know some ABA therapists just had a heart attack in the audience. I don't care. But, yeah, like, basically he came in and Guattari helped him get hooked up with, like, this ranch. And what they did was they tracked what autistic people did all the time, right? They tracked what they were doing. They recorded that on, like, paper, and that's where cartographies comes from. And you'll find later that Brooks gets this wrong because he's repeating the same thing that I've been teaching people about this for years and has managed to accumulate this knowledge via osmosis through my influence. And I'm pretty sure that this is how it actually happened. I don't think that's a manic delusion, me saying that. But I've been educating people about this for a long time, and it's like, yeah, so... But yeah, so basically this is all about the history of Fernand Delaney. And this, again, does not prove anything. If anything, this actually proves more that I am correct than Roger, because this demonstrates that Delaney was functioning on a completely... Like, he was functioning more around autistic people as opposed to schizophrenics. And there's also just that famous quote in Intersecting Lives where Delaney calls out Guattari and says, your molecular revolution will never occur if you don't understand the autistic subjectivity, basically. So, again, that's another reason why, like, this sort of intersection of Guattari and Delaney is so interesting and why I really want to encourage it. But, again, in that process, we should not be erasing the schizophrenic. They're already vulnerable enough. They don't need some idiot who can't read what the text is about seriously lying to a bunch of people about what that Anti-Oedipus is not really about schizophrenia. Like, shut up. Okay. Alright. So, here's the next one. Is this one autism plus spectrum disorders intersection with psychosis and schizophrenia spectrum? I don't understand what these people are trying to prove by saying that there's a complex between autism and schizophrenia. That's not under dispute. In fact, that is a distinction that is modern. That has nothing... If you're going to go with, oh, what about the historical contingencies? That's the thing that... This idea that autism and schizophrenia are related on a neurological level, that is modern. That is modern research. What? Pick a side. Pick a side. Okay. A history of childhood schizophrenia and lessons for autism. So this is a slightly different article. And this article doesn't even talk about European psychiatry. It's about the diagnosis of childhood schizophrenia was widely employed in the U.S. from the 1930s to the late 1970s. In this paper, I will provide a history of the diagnosis. Some of the earliest publications on childhood schizophrenia outline the notion that blah, blah, blah. And it's like, this has nothing to do with Europe. This is America. You do realize that America and Europe have completely different histories and models of psychiatry, right? Like, the reason why I focus on institutional psychotherapy is because American psychiatry is such a black hole of depression that it just feels like there's nothing that you can actually, like, liberate yourself with. Like, I would much rather read fucking R.D. Laing than anything by American psychiatry. American psychiatry is fucking miserable. It's like a black hole. So, yeah, very different worlds. Very different worlds. You would never have something like Laborde in American psychiatry, so it's not even comparable. Right? So, okay. That's wrong. Okay, so here's Brooks coming in. And I'm just gonna keep reading until I encounter something that is just, like, utterly wrong. So this is what he has to say. I think it's also worth noting that the work of Guattari did at Laborde, which was formative to everything he did, it wasn't about what we would call schizophrenics today. Laborde specifically housed severe cases, patients fully withdrawn, catatonic, rocking in fetal position, repetitively hitting their heads on walls. Those are not things today that we would put into the category of schizophrenia. Actually, it is. What are you talking about? This is literally just his opinion. He's just like, alright everybody, I've never talked to a schizophrenic, now let me unload my opinions. Like, I don't know how to tell him this, but I was almost all of those things when I was in my episode. The reason why most people don't get that far is because they don't get that far. It gets caught before it gets that bad. But mine did not. And I can confirm to you, I did all of those things. I experienced all of those things. And I was absolutely schizophrenic. I don't know what he thinks was going on with me when I was experiencing those things. I guess he thought I had a really severe autism attack. What the I shared this with my other schizo friends and they were like, what? What is he talking about? What is he on? The modern schizophrenic absolutely can be any of those things. Not everybody at Laborde was schizo, though. A lot of them were emotionally, disturbed. You had, Guattari literally talks about how much easier it is to, treat a schizophrenic over a neurotic person. He mentions it in the Anti-Oedipus papers, and I'm pretty sure that's brought into AO as well. So, yeah, they weren't just having schizophrenics there. It was mostly, severe mental illness of many types. So there were people who were depressed, and people who were lost, and people who had really bad anxiety and stuff. But there were also schizophrenics there. There were definitely schizophrenics there, and it's crazy how hard they are willing to go to do historical revisionism on this, because there's literally footage of these schizophrenics in the hospital. There is I'm going to show it on screen in editing, but there is a film that translates to Laborde, The Right to Be Mad. And there's so much footage in there that clearly shows schizophrenics. In fact, there's a guy in the kitchen, a very famous schizophrenic, who appears both there and in a documentary 20 years later. So he lived there for 20 years at least, right? And he has catatonic episodes in the kitchen. Did we just forget about that guy? Like, come on, he was a real person who lived. Are we just going to ignore that he existed? Anyways, that's the thing. I'm not, and most are not, saying that it's not schizophrenia. But it's not only schizophrenia today. I don't understand what the hell he means by that. That sounds like some nitpicky Redditor garbage. And again, grain of salt, they were working with a framework that simply doesn't apply today. So the question for me is, what gets us to the most use out of what they've written? To me, it's autism. Well, okay, so be honest that it's your interpretation that it's about autism. I think that's perfectly valid, and as I said before, incredibly valuable. But don't erase the fact that they were talking about schizophrenics. Right? Like it's not that hard. Like, they were talking about schizophrenics. Schreiber and Autrod and all the rest, they were schizophrenics. But we can take these ideas and use them for autism. And the existence of Fernand de Lange should make that very clear why that's a fruitful endeavor. The Most Virtual Autism basically walks through Deleuze's use at length and makes clear what Deleuze has been calling schizo can really only refer to autism. Things like how Bartley, Wolfson, Carroll, and others are his schizo figures of choice, and certainly none would be called such today in the clinical sense. I don't have this paper. I will have to look at it later. I have my doubts, though. I have significant doubts, and I would not trust anything written in English that doesn't have significant French citation published before 2020. So, before that, it's basically fan fiction. So, the other piece goes into a very different direction, but very much goes through the ontological sense of the functionality of capital and how these different dialogues actually were separated because They relate to capital differently. In short, they say that a schizophrenic actively recodes dominant signifying schema, engaging with those representations while disrupting it. The autist turns away from the representational field, reducing their own participation. That doesn't really, like, disprove or disprove anything about whether or not the people at Laborde were schizophrenic or autistic. And, of course, the simple fact that when discussing the schizo, they use terms like withdrawal from linguistic communication, repetitive territorial behaviors, signifying semiotic production, fascination with non-human objects, resistance to the symbolic order, catatonic silence as a mode of being rather than a symptom of psychotic break. Those are not indices of modern schizophrenia at all. So are we going to tell them? Those actually are symptoms of modern schizophrenia. Like, you know how you just posted all those articles saying, oh, schizophrenia and autism, they're very similar. Have you considered, like, are the gears clicking yet? Yeah, it's because they're similar. They have similar expressions because they have relationships to each other, what they are. Okay, it's kind of vague. It's kind of hard to grasp that through, complex neurological research. But did we just forget about that thing you just established? Okay, so he says in chaosmosis, he writes, discursivity is for me first of all a trajectory ... the immobile pregeneration that grasping a Zen garden consists of, to the point that achieving the total presence of Satori is closed to any communication, or indeed even an autistic child's fascination with the slow formation of a drop of water, the endlessly reiterated falling of which he greets with the same explosion of joy and jouissance. Right? This quote is really funny because you know where he got it from? Are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? He got it from the post that I made. This is the exact same fucking quote right here. He is pulling the exact same quote that I used, except he's saying it's from Chaosmosis. It's not in Chaosmosis. I checked. Guattari has a tendency to have his works in English be republished in several books. The most obvious example is how, like, half of Soft Subversions is just early translations of schizoanalytic cartographies. Yeah, he literally just took the same quote that I did and then misattributed it to make it sound like he actually reads Guattari. Dude, we all know you don't read Guattari. We all know you are just grabbing the shit that I put in front of you and then you misremembered where it came from. And he does this several times in here. It's really stupid and funny. But, like, it's not in Chaosmosis. It's the same quote that I used, and yeah. He names it so he says he names it explicitly. What year is this? Oh, he gave the talk in 86, 5 years after the DSM separated them out. Actually, he started changing his language around that. Guattari didn't work within the DSM. That's an American thing. He was a psychoanalyst. That's completely different. Like, what? He didn't care about what the DSM was saying, and he still used the term autism in Anti-Oedipus, but again, he uses it as a symptom. He is right to point out that by this point, it's more than a symptom, I would argue, in the way that Guattari uses it. But again, I think that just reflects natural, like, developments in understanding, childhood autism, where it was like, oh, there's a whole group of children who develop this way. And you gotta remember that this understanding was developing in different ways, in different rates, at different times, in different places. They were in France. You can't just borrow shit from American psych. That doesn't work that way. Alright, so, on this he says, on that, Delaney, who absolutely was inspirational to all this shit, ran a commune for autistic children who would have been institutionalized. I mean, dude came up with the ideas of line of flight for them, using the autistic kids as his inspiration, and Guattari ran with it. Delaney may be one of the most important influences on Guattari, period. Dude did not work with schizophrenics. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. First off, Brooks, I am the one who has been teaching people about this primarily in English-speaking spaces since like 2021, okay? I'm the one who's been sharing this online and stuff. You are repeating the same thing that I have been teaching people, except you get your facts in the wrong order, and you're remembering things wrong. Okay, so let me explain to you, as the person who actually has been educating people on this, that you're incorrectly repeating on why you're wrong about this. Okay, so again, like I said, Guattari helped Delaney get this ranch in 1967. They worked together. They knew each other. They were working with each other through the 70s. And it is true that Delaney was an important influence on Guattari. But again, it was not lines of flight that they got from the thing. It was cartographies. And it was cartographies because it was based on tracing the lines of where the autistic children went throughout the day. Line of flight, it actually has a very interesting story. I have seen some research that it's actually from George Jackson, who was like a black radical who was in prison, and he wrote a bunch of stuff in prison. And it's quite a few people believe that Deleuze actually did not cite him properly for the term line of flight, and he kind of like, there's kind of like a bit of a racist thing going on there where he doesn't really give this black man like a full space to like have himself, you know, codified with his contributions alongside the works of white men and stuff. So yeah, that's completely wrong. And he just literally just misremembering things because he's thinking, oh yeah, cartography, line of flight, those are related. Like, come on, dude, we all see it. Just take the L already. And really, the biggest reason that this is important is because they do not want us to valorize the clinical entity, but instead the process that it reveals that works in us all. But that's not what we're arguing over. And like I've said, really what Guattari is like criticizing is like he doesn't want people to look at schizophrenics who are in a spiral, who are not stabilized, and say, hey, you know, we should be like them. No, you don't want to be like them because they're in a constant state of collapse. But schizophrenics can recover from that, right? I'm not in that state of collapse, but I still call myself schizophrenic because I recovered from that. It had a major impact on my brain functioning, and I have a lot of disabilities as a result of that experience. And that's, you know, somebody like me is what Guattari would be referring to, because I'm stable, but I see the world in a different way after the brain damage that's occurred from schizophrenia. So, and that's, and you know, Brooks is right to say that this process is occurring everywhere, but it's occurring through minoritarian movements. So, like, the schizo would be one of those. In fact, the reason why they gravitate towards the schizo, in my opinion, is because the schizo represents the most abstract, generic example that they can think of in a material context. That's why they explore the concept of the schizophrenic relative to the clinical entity. So, yeah, the process is the schiz. The clinical entity is the broken down, stuttering, incommunicable endpoint. It's not the endpoint, actually. I want to point that out as a bit of a nitpick. It's not the endpoint. The endpoint is the body without organs. The clinical point is the recapture into capitalism. That's why they have that diagram where it has the line where, the clinical entity is being pulled out. That's because the clinical entity is not actually the end of that process. Funny that you mention those, because the post in question cites those, lol. Yeah, It's so funny that Brooks can't even pull that shit without people noticing. But they fall for his stupid crap anyway. So, that's odd. You didn't notice? Of course you fucking noticed, you dipshit. You fucking lying, stupid piece of shit. You absolutely fucking noticed, you little pussy, big fuck, dumb fuck. I'm not sure how that shows anything other than what I was saying. Well, like I said, if you actually read the original post, going back to that, Guattari was the one responsible for helping fund and house his project from the mid-1960s until the 1980s. Delaney and Guattari were at odds with each other by the end, and Delaney even aggressively proclaims that Guattari's molecular revolution was bound to fail if it could not account for the autistic subjectivity properly. Guattari also mentions autistics in his 1986 lecture Cracks in the Street, republished in Schizoanalytic Cartographies, that did occur after the publication of Anti-Oedipus, but I find it hard to believe that clinical psychiatry has had that radical of a transformation within less than 10 years. Now, in that context, I'm explaining that Delaney and Guattari's work were separate entities, and by the 1960s, we clearly knew that the childhood autistic patient was very different in terms of like clinical interaction and stuff than the adult schizophrenic. Those two groups were treated separately, and in general, and like this is obviously evident by the fact that Guattari worked primarily with schizophrenics and emotionally disturbed adults, and Delaney worked with children. Like, I don't understand, like, what their point is. Like, it seems like when they actually go deeper into this, they prove themselves wrong, and then they just deny it. So, like they say, it doesn't show them anything than what other that I'm saying. Well, the original text agrees with that position, and, like, it's more so that you're just making up a bunch of shit around it. So... Yeah, I was just reading through all of them and wondering how the conclusion of modern schizophrenia was reached by the poster. Well, I am the poster, so I can explain that to you. See, the quote says, "Anyway, it seems to me that it is much easier to help a schizophrenic patient than a neurotic one. Easy on the condition that you work at it full time. You have to mobilize all the resources available in terms of deterritorialized third articulations. If you immerse schizos full time in a police-like environment produced by nurses and hospital institutions, you end up, obviously, with the kind of description of schizophrenia that we are very accustomed to, a bi-univocalized neurotic description, dissociation, autism, etc. Strangely, if schizoanalysis is offering to schizophrenic neurosis, it still blames psychiatry for neuroticizing psychosis." It's actually kind of funny because I forgot that this was in... Oh wait, no, this is the Anti-Oedipus papers. I thought it was in AO for a second, but no, this is the Anti-Oedipus papers. So... basically what I am using this quote to demonstrate is that autism is seen as a symptom here. It is a symptom of the bi-univocalized neurotic, right? It's part of the description, the dissociation, the autism, right? And what this quote is saying is that this is a product of the schizo interacting with the clinical environment, right? The clinic turns the schizo into a neurotic, essentially, is what they're saying here. But they are talking about a schizophrenic. I don't understand how you can read this honestly and be like, no, they're talking about autism. Like, they are talking about autism as a symptom. As a symptom. Okay? I mean, I could just keep going, just in the book he's citing. Which now he goes to chaosmosis, so now he's picking up chaosmosis for the first time. The unconscious is not structured like a language. It's annoying, but it's true. The unconscious doubly doesn't give a shit about structure or language. No unconscious subjectivity, no reference structures. Schizophrenia is not a-verbal. It's based in language. This is literally just him making up shit about schizophrenics. This is literally not clinically true at all. The schizophrenic is about the loss of that cohesion in that language. Like, it's not linguistic. It's not like a neurotic, where a neurotic you could be successful in analyzing like a psychoanalyst. A schizophrenic has to be handled differently because their words don't mean the same thing. So you know how like Deleuze and Guattari talk about how desiring production produces all this crap that later turns into language? The schizos are producing a bunch of crap that doesn't produce language. That's what they're fucking talking about. The unconscious is not structured like a language because they're producing a bunch of shit, right? This is a response to how Lacan was characterizing schizophrenia. Like, come on, dude. Ori describes a conversation that he had with a young schizo, to whom he asked, who are your friends here at Laborde? The schizo gave him 2 names. Ori thought about it for a minute, and then realized that those were the names of the 2 people sitting in the waiting room. And, like, he's reading this, and Brooks is basically like, well, they talk, so clearly they're not talking about autistic people. Like, are you fucking... I want to, like, grab this man by his stupid fucking beard and just give him, like, a big fucking, like, swirly in the toilet after this. This is just infuriating. This is the kind of Reddit nitpicking garbage from uneducated losers who use their, you know, background in, you know, social media crap, to push their bullshit narratives. Like, what the fuck? He literally says that they're schizo, and he's just like, no, they're not schizo. They're not schizo. They're clearly talking about autistic people, even though, like, what? This is... I'm unable to link this to anything except modern autism as we talk about it. Autism being dependent on this context. He's literally just quote mining chaosmosis and not reading anything about the historical context or any of this shit, so he can just have this stupid fan fiction theory. Okay, let's go. Hey, look, masking. Minowski, French psychoanalyst who believed that the phenomenological essence of schizophrenia amounts to a loss of vital contact with reality, and it is manifest as autism. Brooks, he's referring to the symptom, you fucking moron. He's not referring to the DSM-oid definition of autism, you fucking moron. I love how he's like, I could do this all day. Yeah, you can go and dance around like a fucking moron all day, and I could do this all day. We could do this all day, or we could be productive and write the best essay of all time. It's your choice. I don't know enough about Minkowski to say that whether or not he believed autism was a disorder or a symptom, but in the context of everything that I found in the Anti-Oedipus papers and Anti-Oedipus, it is absolutely used as a symptom, so it doesn't really matter. Even if they're quoting his work, it doesn't matter, because Guattari clearly thinks that autism is a symptom in his text. It seems obvious, even in the section cited. So if it's obvious, then just explain it. You know, because it's so obvious. Anyways, let's keep going. Bodies without organs become total pits. Sheets of blotting paper absorb words at the same time as they absorb everything else. It's the danger of gazing at the gaze, gazing at one's own image with one's own eyes. The overwhelm of the BWO, that's not the schizophrenic reaction to things. This is a person who can't filter stimuli and distinguish them. Again, have you ever talked to a schizophrenic? Like, what do you think that it feels like to experience intense hallucinations? Does that not count as me having to filter stimuli, or does this not count as me not being able to filter stimuli and distinguish them? Like, I'm literally experiencing all these weird fucking trippy things. Does that not count? Like, he's just drawing these fucking borders in the sand. And I want to, I don't want to spoil too much, but Brooks gets his ass handed to him by somebody else in this conversation. I'm very excited to show you that part of the conversation later, but yeah, he's spinning a ton of bullshit here. Ooh, some other good ones. Like, again, we all know you haven't picked up chaosmosis up to this point, so you're just quote mining. Without the current Oedipal triangle, everything slips up and fucks off into a connectivity and desiring filtration. The schizo is the proletarian of transduction. He works in the third articulation. Current psychoanalysis would be a sort of anti-productive activity participating in the capitalist principle of the maximum economy of polyvocal. So I do feel like pointing out that chaosmosis was written in the late 1990s. It was Guattari's last book. And so when he says schizo here, he's not talking about 1960s schizophrenic when they're talking about Anti-Oedipus. He's talking about 1990s schizophrenic in France, which of course is still not the same thing as what we would see in the DSM. But I think that this holds a lot less water considering that he's still referring to the schizo in 1990. Even though in 1986 he had that other essay that clearly explicitly made clear that he knew what an autistic child was, and he separated that from a schizophrenic. But in 1992, he's still using the term schizo. Why do you think that is? Is that because they are magically just autistic, or do you think that the guy who spent his entire life working with schizophrenics is talking about schizophrenics? Let's use our brains here and try to figure this one out, guys. So, you want polyvocal. That is, there is a clinical entity who exists that is capable of that, naturally operating within it, who has cognition on that works across multiple non-hierarchical sensory and semiotic channels at once. That's the autistic. And it's also the schizo. Like I said, they are positioned differently in the loss of the subject of the eye. So, like, I don't understand why he hates schizophrenics so much. I mean, I do. Because Deleuze and Guattari made it clear why everyone hates the schizo. But, Jesus Christ. The schizophrenic doesn't do this. Their polyvocality is typically externalized and experienced as intrusion. No, it's not. It's literally not. It's not experienced as intrusion. He's literally just making this up. And he has no source, by the way, for any of this. But, all I can think of is that people don't realize these are real diagnoses and not just terms people use on the internet. Shut the fuck up, Brooks! I'm literally schizophrenic, you piece of shit. I'm not just saying this because I'm LARPing. Fuck you! Also, Guattari's notes are so, unguarded, I guess he's trying to say there. And it's so clear he writes his best when not caring. Yeah, that's true. That's why you should read Félix Guattari instead of pretending to and opening Chaosmosis for the first time in your fucking life, because the guy who actually reads Félix Guattari has told you that you're full of shit again. More quotes. The unconscious doesn't speak or discuss things. It works in its own way. It fools around. It doodles. It doesn't give a shit. 100% not the schizophrenic patient at all. Again, Brooks... I would like Brooks to actually, instead of negatively describing the schizophrenic in terms of what the schizo is not, I would like him to actually take time to explain what the schizophrenic is, because it's not very clear at all what he believes a schizophrenic is. Like, everything that you would think that a schizophrenic is apparently not schizophrenic to Brooks, so Brooks should probably make clear what he's actually referring to when he says schizophrenic. It seems like schizophrenia to him is the category that he can just say, no, it's not, it's autism. So, yeah, that would be a good thing to explain when you're live streaming this. Someone is inhabited by someone else's speech. Others talk and gesticulate in our place when we are talking on our own account. Free, equal, and fraternal. We must learn to be individuals. Always the personalist in illusion. Like, I'm not sure I could even find all the references to the way masking works. There are just so many. The schizophrenic has a self. The experience intrusion. Autistics don't have a self, as it is primarily performance layered over primary existence. Oh my fucking god. I have so many... Okay, so I'm pretty sure many autistic people are a little upset by what Brooks is saying, and I am too. I think autistic people actually have more sense of a sense of self than schizophrenics do, and the reason why is because autistic people like, they have a sense of self. They have an understanding of self. What they don't understand is the social contextualization of that self. Schizophrenics actually lose their contact with themselves. When I was going schizophrenic, for example, when I was in my, like, worst episodes, I had points where I essentially experienced becoming a machine, right? So I didn't experience myself. I didn't experience a self, right? And that doesn't mean I don't have any sort of position of self-reference, right? It doesn't mean I don't have the ability to, contextualize my body in a larger sphere, but that semiotic machine that was forming around my delusions was structured in such a way where I was not like a self in the sense that I'm an individual, which is what, Guattari is saying here. Guattari is saying that you have to be instructed to be a self, and the schizo is when you are instructed to be the self, and then it breaks apart later. And I just don't understand, again, why Brooks is so hostile to this. Like, it's like he's purposely just ignoring it. I mean, we all know what happens in youth, and there is a reason we focus on autism diagnosis as early as possible. Guattari treats the childhood itself as a site of the polyvocal that is suppressed by socialization. Lacan was heavy here too. All the casework they both discuss around formative elements of kids touch into this. That's not incorrect. Like, I'm not sure if I could even find all the references to the way masking works. Okay, he said that already. There is an entire section where Guattari goes over Fernand Uri, the brother of Jean Uri, dude who founded Laborde. Fernand dictated his life to create a school system that might work for autistic kids. He also talks about his own issues in this and relates to them on what he's working on. He says obsessively went over and over his childhood addresses, had fixation on number reversals, sensory memorizations around objects and particular routes of travel. Like, he describes autistic phenomenology firsthand. Most of this is correct. I just want to point out that this last paragraph, Guattari does those things. It's kind of funny. Like, if you actually read his text, he's obsessed with, like, the addresses that he grew up on. Like, if you know anything, if you read Guattari, you know that the dove and the eagle is, like, this theme that goes on and on. He has this, but I would not say it's, like, an autistic way that he approaches it. Guattari's kind of weird. He comes off like he's autistic schizo, but he doesn't, like, breach the barrier, if that makes sense, to, like, be disabling. It's weird. He's a very strange individual. Anyways, ooh, that's great. Where can I find that? Him discussing his own issues, that is. That's in the Anti-Oedipus papers. Oh, okay, so Brooks does acknowledge that he is talking about his own issues. Yeah, alright, whatever. I absolutely love the fact that we have real professionals on this server able to answer these questions like this. Brooks is not a real professional. He is literally from the fucking gaming industry. Like, what are you talking about? This guy says, imagine being obsessed for 4 years because you got banned from a server for being an asshole and harassing trans people. Okay, so let's talk about why I got banned from DGQC. So, first off, let's talk about 4 years, because I actually got banned in this server in, like, I think 2023? So it wasn't 4 years ago. When I first met Brooks, it was in 2021, and I was in maximum schizo mode, so I was already very paranoid. And he approached me explaining how cool and based it is that he's making these augmented reality simulations that basically roleplay the Syrian war, and isn't that base that I am trying to sell this to Disney or something like that? And I was just like, I was like schizo, so I was like, what the fuck, man? What's wrong with you? Everything's wrong with you. You're evil. Oh my god. Like, that was my brain. That's literally my introduction to this guy. He literally pulled me aside back in 2021. He was like, you're one of the real ones who understands how this shit works. And I'm just like, yeah, whatever, poser. Suck my dick. You have to find it first. But, like, yeah, that's his introduction to me, and I was immediately creeped out by that. And so I came back in 2023 because I wanted to, give him a second chance, because I was like, well, I was schizo, and I was, like, really paranoid, and maybe I'm just, Yeah, whatever. So I go in there, and their Discord server is full of a bunch of dumb assholes who are full of themselves. It's a very negative atmosphere. Like, there's a reason why I've received so many complaints about this Discord. It's full of assholes. It's full of people who are willing to backstab each other and do not care about philosophy in the slightest. It's all a bunch of white undergrads who are just, like, basically masturbating to how cool they are. It's such a loser fest. And you know it's a loser fest because what have they actually actively produced in the 5 years, 6 years that they've been around? They've produced a bunch of idiot bullies who don't understand Deleuze. That's not what my community has produced. My community has actually actively produced things. I've had people, like, you know, my work has actually influenced quite a few people to research Guattari more seriously. So, yeah, like, there's a way that you can run a Discord server to be productive or anti-productive, and I don't think that they make a productive server. But, anyways, I got really sick of their shit, so what I started doing was I started trolling people in general. So I would say things like, oh yeah, well, why don't you guys all drop out of philosophy and get a real job so that you don't have to do any work and then earn 100K for doing nothing, and then just read philosophy the whole time, because then you get to have money, sex, bitches, and philosophy instead of being homeless, not having money, not having bitches, but having philosophy. And clearly I was saying this not because I despise academic philosophy, more so because I despise these people and I kind of want to watch them drop out. But, like, it was obviously a shit post, and it had also nothing to do with trans people. And the real reason why I got banned had also had nothing to do with trans people. It had everything to do with me basically, okay, I was literally, like, somebody was posting something so factually incorrect that I just felt bad for them, and I, you know, argued with them. They basically were saying, well, I want to study Vietnamese leftism, right? And I was like, okay. And they're like, but I only want to cite US state sources and Wikipedia and Vietnam state sources. And I was like, you have to read, like, organic literature written by people. And I shared an article and they got really mad at me because I didn't read the article. And it's like, well, I'm not going to do your research for you. I was literally just pulling up a literal example, and they were all like, oh my god, this is like Marxist-Leninist propaganda, oh my god. And it's like, do you guys understand how research works? Like, you do have to read the things that disagree with your opinions too, if you want to actually have an honest understanding of what Vietnamese leftism looks like. You're gonna have to read the things that are propaganda articles for things that you don't like. And I got banned because they just got sick of my shit, basically. There's a reason why they don't post receipts when they go around and claim this transphobia thing. There's two reasons, actually. The first reason is that Brooks pinned that comment on his philosophy tube video from President Sunday that is pretty transphobic, in my opinion. I've already gone over why this comment is transphobic, but basically it's transphobic because they're implying that, like, it's some sort of, like, political, like, you know, grievance or whatever, like, some kind of struggle to, like, talk over a trans person, which is, like, out of all of the things to make fun of with philosophy tube, you're gonna go and just be transphobic. Okay, like, there's so many things that you can work with that you're just like, let's just be transphobic. So, yeah. I would love to see receipts of me being transphobic, because I don't remember any of this shit, right? In terms of being, like, harassing trans people. I guess they think that harassing trans people, when I was going around and trolling these people because some of them were trans, that's harassing trans people. And I mean, I guess. But it's very clear that these guys are trying to say I'm transphobic, which is the funniest, stupidest bullshit I've ever heard in my life. Like, everybody who says this is like a baby who is not serious about, like, anything with gender politics, and considering that this is the first time he's ever picked up chaosmosis, I wouldn't be surprised if this is he's never even picked up a gender book before too. This is the same thing. Now, with that all out of the way, I have to introduce you to this figure named Lou. I love Lou. Lou is the best person in this Discord server. Lou, if you ever see this video, I want you to know that you are awesome. You are amazing. You keep doing what you're doing. You are a brave warrior who has to tolerate with some really stupid fucking petty bullshit. Anyways, let's talk about what Lou has to say. Lou says, on a conceptual level, I think it's just important to recognize that DG are using psychosis specifically because the concept is conceptually mess as it is. Contact with psychosis deterritorializes. So my contention would be to let psychosis deterritorialize autism rather than to try to territorialize psychosis via DSM autism. 100% correct. We should allow psychosis to deterritorialize autism. And that's in fact what a analysis of AO through like an autistic reading would present. You know, experience, like analyzing these experiences of schizophrenics and saying, how is this similar to autistic people? That is the first step. And it's kind of funny because if he just turned off his fucking like bullshit and actually focused on that project, he would actually be producing something very important. Also, in my opinion, I think it's probably just wrong to take the DSM rather than Lacan as a source for reference categories of diagnosis. Specifically, the relationship between psychosis and symbolic order you bring up are very clearly spins on Lacan's concepts of psychosis. This is because Guattari was a student of Lacan for years and years, and Anti-Oedipus arose from his own personal conflict with Lacan's ideas. So, it makes no sense to analyze AO through the DSM because it doesn't reflect anything about it, but it does make sense to analyze it through Lacan and through other psychoanalysis and stuff like that. The DSM-5 does not reflect what Brooks is saying about schizophrenia at all, and yeah, it doesn't. It's literally, yeah, he's just making shit up. Here is just where they prove this with a bunch of, like, it's from the DSM-5 from 2013. Brooks is playing fucking stupid. He's like, I don't see where it's wrong, except that catatonia is possible thing across multiple mental conditions. Yeah, none of these things I mentioned are indices in that text. Lou. A, signifying semiotic production, withdrawal from linguistic communication, resistance to the symbolic order. Where? Of course he says where, fucking idiot. Other negative symptoms including allegoria, anhedonia, and asociality. Allegoria is manifested by diminished speech output. So, like, just speaking as somebody who is struggling with negative symptoms of schizophrenia right now, you know, specifically, the ones I really just struggle with is, like, experiencing, like, pleasure and being more social. It's kind of like the parts of your brain that were able to do that in the past are just not functioning anymore, right? And that's a lot of what happens with schizophrenia. All these parts that, you know, Brooks is taking for granted are real things that break down in schizophrenia, and he doesn't seem to understand that schizophrenia is the breakdown of those things. Generally, one of the problems with schizophrenia as a category is that it is defined by the presence of abundance of disparate symptoms rather than a specific set. But I think this is somewhat besides the point. Anyway, the question is, what would be a conceptual function that you're trying to argue, and I don't really see that being answered. And you'll also run into problems incorporating Autrod, Lenz, and Schreiber into an autism-restrictive reading, and Lang, etc. Completely correct. Completely correct. And all of those figures are mentioned in Anti-Oedipus. Brooks responds, he says, it does tend to be a catch-all, but as I've read and understood, the difference is how these things come to bear. For example, one may express anhedonia or say asociality. These on their own don't mean much. I mean, Brooks, they on their own don't mean much, but it's pretty obvious what negative symptoms in schizophrenia are, and they are not like the typical, like, oh, I'm depressed or whatever. It's very different than being depressed. It's like, it's in fact, when I experience them, I'm not even necessarily depressed. I'm more frustrated because I can't feel my feelings. They feel separate from me. This is part of the breakdown of the subject of the self. You know, you don't feel those things. Now, I'm lucky. I have a part of my brain that, you know, through the schizophrenic process, you know, has a sort of identity that's able to feel those things. So I kind of feel them indirectly through this figure in my head. But that's still the same thing. It's still that dissociation and breakdown of the self, right? So, he continues, schizophrenia in this text and all I've read is defined by a break in reality testing. All the things in those images you posted pressure an a prior typical functioning that is disrupted. It's baked into how it's diagnosed. The person has a shared reality and are breaking from it. Disorganized speech here is disorganized thought, not a different modality of thinking. Fuck you, Brooks. Fuck you. You're doing everything you can to take what a schizophrenic is and trying to neuroticize it. Are you the clinician? Are you the promoter of clinical psychiatry? Why are you fucking reading Anti-Oedipus if that is your fucking approach? Like, what? It literally doesn't make any fucking sense. But like I keep saying, like, he is right that it is a breakdown of these things, but he is trying everything to explain that a breakdown of these things is still the same thing. You know, if I smash your fucking car and it works differently and, like, the engine is pushing around but it can't drive, is that still, like, a car? Is that still a unified subject? Like, the engine still runs. It's still, I mean, it knocks really hard, but it still runs. You know, obviously, it's still a car, right? Fuck you, Brooks. ASD is developmental, though. There is no break. It is not about delusions. Instead, it is about intense engagements, not false beliefs. Fuck you, Brooks. It's not about hallucinations. The language issues are pragmatic, social, not disorderly. Repetition comes from self-regulation, not psychosis. Fuck you, Brooks. Schizophrenia tends to be a disorder of how one contacts with reality. ASD is a different mode of processing the stimulus at all. Fuck you, Brooks. You know, there's plenty of autistic schizophrenics out there who could just nuke this fucking dumb asshole out of oblivion. You're not a doctor, you're not a psychiatrist, you're a fucking game developer. Shut the fuck up. This is the big reason they moved childhood schizophrenia into a new thing, right? No, it's because childhood schizophrenia was always a controversial diagnosis and was converted into autism in America. I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an expert on American psychiatry history. But if I recall correctly, it was a product of, like, just how controversial the idea of childhood schizophrenia is. I mean, it's controversial for a reason, because most psychotherapists believe that you need to have a conception of the I before you can have that breakdown. So it doesn't make sense. It's clearly something else. And to me, it's not about excluding the schizophrenic. It absolutely is, you stupid, cowardly fuck. That would be silly, since they use the entire umbrella term in their writings. That's why you keep saying it's not about the schizophrenic, it's about autism. Because, you know, they're just using schizophrenia to trick you. But to not talk about how autism is central to this due to the development of things, I mean, they are talking about the types of schizos in the clinic, the catatonic or the mentally broken, when they talk about the varying patients. They are talking about schizophrenic adults. Like, again, I'm showing footage from various documentaries on Labor to demonstrate they were absolutely talking about adults, right? Like Little Hans, Little Dick, or Little Joey. They are called little not because of their size, they were kids. All three of them have an object fixation, mechanical thought, and worlds made of sensory items. None of them were schizophrenic, though. They were referencing those little, the little characters in psychoanalysis because they were demonstrating how psychoanalysts try to shove these children into narratives of Oedipus. Like, that's what that was about. They weren't saying they were schizo. And, in fact, part of the reason why they use children is because children, schizophrenics, and autistics all experience this sort of differential that pulls them away from the structuralism of capital. That's part of the reason why this all started. But, again, I think it's fair to ask for historical accuracy instead of, you know, presenting your personal theory as fan fiction as reality. Then the adults like Schreiber or Lenzi or Autran. These are adults who aren't developing their own modality, but instead finding themselves crushed into another one and breaking. I guess I still see it all one thing, but pretending those kids aren't autistic, that Guattari didn't almost exclusively deal with autistics at Laborde, it's missing so much about something that is far closer to people now. He was not working with autistic people. How many fucking times do I have to tell you? It's obvious, because you can just look at what Fernand Delaney was doing and you can compare it to Laborde, and it's like, okay, so these were children and these were adults, and these adults act in a schizophrenic way that is quite different from what an autistic, acts like, a severely autistic person. Like, these are people who had breakdowns, who collapsed and acted that way. I genuinely think that, Brooks just does not understand what schizophrenia is. He doesn't understand how serious it is. He doesn't understand what it does to a person. He's just saying this shit because he, again, like Deleuze and Guattari criticize, he hates the schizophrenic. So, let's keep going. So Lou responds and says, I think this is an adequate summary of how these things are understood within psychiatry today, maybe a bit optimistic on the autism side, but I think it's important to recognize that this is a different discussion than DG are having, because DG's argument about schizophrenia psychosis is that the medical definition you just pointed out is inadequate in several dimensions. Schizophrenia tends to be a disorder with how long... yes, in the DSM model. But that is not what AO is saying about psychosis and how autism relates to it. Specifically, the loss of contact with reality is something that DG problematize entirely. Loss of contact with reality is what they were referring to when they say autism. They are not referring to ASD. This is a big reason why they moved childhood schizophrenia to a new thing, right? So this is a complicated question. I don't think it helps with understanding AO. Yes, this is more or less the medical argument, although there are multiple sources for the separation. There are also multiple arguments for it that don't always agree. But importantly, there is, from the history of medicine perspective, a point to be made that you cannot reduce such developments to medical arguments. Specifically, in the case of autism, you have, one, in the American context, there's a radicalization of schizophrenia that it begins as the latest in the 1960s. Separating autism from schizophrenia is under that perspective in a way to maintain this race boundary. The racialization. Sorry, they said in the American context, the racialization of schizophrenia that begins at the latest in the 1960s. Separating autism from schizophrenia is under that perspective a way to maintain this race boundary. This is very important. Something that Brooks has a tendency to neglect in general is racial interactions, because he's a fucking cracker. But yes, race must be analyzed when understanding schizophrenia as a historical subject within America. Like, it's just, there's so many connections with it, and the just the police in general and all that shit. You just have to, yeah. In the German context, you have Asperger, who worked on autism, and specifically the division of high and low functioning is inseparable from a eugenic project. Like literal Nazi killed disabled children eugenics. 100% true. That's what Hans Asperger was doing. Reducing these concepts to medical definitions is not sufficient. You need the political and libidinal economy of the production of medical knowledge, which incidentally is exactly one of the points AO makes. I think this, and in response to is excluding the schizophrenic, I think this is a valid impulse, and why I point to Masumi, who basically uses DG's points about psychosis to give an account of autism. But I also think it is a mistake to accept current medical definitions as unproblematic or more ontologically correct than those older frameworks when engaging with AO. This also runs into the danger of sanitizing what they're doing. Very important. Thank you, Lou. Autism is much more palpable and much less stigmatized than psychosis right now, especially in these circles here. Thank you, Lou. Thank you. This boundary in stigma is exactly why the genealogical biopolitical dimension of the diagnosis is important. You cannot draw this boundary without the politics. Thank you, Lou. I fucking love you. So what I'm saying is this: understanding autism through AO is worthwhile. Using autistic experience to find an entry into AO is valid, but using current medical frameworks as the schema for understanding AO is a mistake. Thank you, Lou. And again, I do not disagree with analyzing AO through an autistic context, and I believe that it's actually a very important project. However, I do believe that erasing the schizophrenic is a perpetuation of a serious problem, as Lou demonstrates, that the schizophrenic is a very highly stigmatized class, and there is a very serious risk of, misrepresentation when you try to cut them out. And Brooks, to be clear, you are using every single tool in your repertoire to try to erase the schizo. So, yeah, I'm very interested in seeing what your response is, Brooks, and you better not hide behind your fucking stupid, shitty Discord server, because I'm gonna find out, and I'm just gonna make another video dragging you until you fucking stop being a coward.